my name is Kelly O'Brien, and I lead both the Chicago Central Area Committee and the Alliance for Regional Development. If this is your first time tuning into one of our webinars, the Chicago Central Area Committee was created over 64 years ago, and it focuses on the planning and development of Chicago. In fact, the organization and its members have been at the forefront of creating the plans that have really positioned the city to be the global destination that it is today. And in 2012, the world's leading think tank on economic development, the OECD, published a 300-page roadmap for how to grow the regional economy. And they defined the mega region as the Milwaukee, Chicagoland, Northwest Indiana corridor. 21 counties, they concluded by looking at data in the 3 states, operate as an economic unit. But because of the state lines, we don't always cooperate, share best practices, and really advance cross-jurisdictional opportunities, which is why stakeholders from the 3 states came together in 2012 and created the Alliance for Regional Development. I'm just thrilled to be able to have one of our Alliance board members, Julia Taylor, on today's program. And not only is Julia a member of the board, but Julia was also instrumental in helping us secure Paul Jones, former CEO and chairman of the board of the global manufacturing company A.O. Smith, to be the chairman of the Alliance. And he has really been with us from day one. I know Paul had hoped to join us today, but because of a conflict, he will not be able to be with us live, but he did ask me to make sure I said hello to Secretary Hughes and Julia Taylor. So on behalf of Paul, hello ladies. So what I'd like to do is give a brief introduction of our guests and then ask them to provide some remarks, and we will then open it up to the audience. Please use the Q&A button if there are questions you would like me to relay to either Secretary Hughes or Julia Taylor. So with that, Secretary Hughes is the CEO and the leader of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Prior to being the Secretary of Commerce for Wisconsin, she was the General Counsel and Chief Mission Officer at Organic Valley. I can't even tell you how many Organic Valley products I currently have in my refrigerator. Huge fan. Prior to that post, she was at a private law firm, and while there also served on an advisory committee that she was appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture to the USDA Advisory Committee on Agriculture and Biotechnology in the 21st century. So always, it appears that you've had a heart for public service. Julia Taylor, as I mentioned, is a board member for the Alliance, and she's currently the president of the Greater Milwaukee Committee. She took that post in 2002. Prior to that, she was the president of the YMCA of Greater Milwaukee for 16 years, managed a $40 million annual budget, and is really regarded for creating initiatives that have resulted in national models for employment training and placement, affordable housing, women's leadership, and racial justice. I know that you were in the banking industry prior to that, and as I say to anybody that when your name comes up in conversations, I really consider you the grande dame of Milwaukee. There's nobody who doesn't know you, and there's nobody that knows you that doesn't love you. So it is really an honor to have both of you here today. Before we get started, Secretary Hughes, is there anything about your background that I failed to share that you want the audience to know?
No, that's great. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for having OV products in your refrigerator. My husband still works for them, so
Excellent.
You're keeping it in the family.
Excellent, excellent. Well, and just as a really quick side note, I found that the sausages have the lowest sodium count of any sausages on the market. My father is has to be on a heart healthy diet. Sausage is one of his favorites, so I have scoured the stores, and I'm really happy that he loves them, and it's been a really good treat. So good work.
Great.
And Julia, anything about your background that I failed to share?
Well, I also have a lot of Organic Valley products in my fridge, but also I would say it was the YWCA, not the YMCA.
Oh,
for actually about over 30 years in several different YWs.
Thank you. You know, I have YWCA, and of course I just misspoke. So thank you for that clarification. So Secretary Hughes, I assume that you've been pretty busy leading the WEDC these days.
Oh, no, just laying around eating Organic Valley sausages. I knew this was going to be a commercial for Organic Valley. Yeah, so I thought maybe I'd take a few minutes and just tell you what we've been up to at WEDC and what we're thinking about going forward.
Perfect.
So as Kelly mentioned, I've been on the job since October 1st, and I spent the first 5 or 6 months really learning about economic development. I don't come from an economic development background, and so I wanted to understand what Wisconsin's economic development landscape is like, and learned a ton about our industry, our manufacturing, our aerospace, our water. We just have a lot going on in Wisconsin, and I took advantage of having some time to really learn about it. And who knew that at the beginning of March it would all get completely thrown upside down and in and out, and what everybody has experienced in the last few months with the pandemic. But as the pandemic hit Wisconsin, we really saw our small businesses take a huge impact, as in most states, but I'll just talk about what we saw in Wisconsin, where you went from normal life to gatherings of no more than 50, and then gatherings of no more than 10. You could see the dominoes fall of our businesses that gathered those folks, whether it was performance venues or restaurants or cafes or hairstylists. All of these small businesses that are the fabric of our communities throughout the state really took that impact. And so at WEDC, we really turned our focus to helping those small businesses, whether it was working with the Small Business Administration to get the designation for the economic injury disaster loans way back when, but also working as PPP started rolling out. But we became concerned about businesses that weren't going to be able to access those programs. For whatever reason, they didn't have the relationships with their banks, or they were unbanked or underbanked. And so the first thing that we did was launch a $5 million program that we called SB 2020, Small Business 2020. And it was for businesses of less than 20 employees, and they were able to get a grant of $20,000 or less. We worked with the CDFIs around the state to help identify those businesses. And we were, excited about the opportunity, even if it was just a drop in the bucket, to learn what the small businesses were experiencing. And we were really able to see how they were being stressed as far as meeting payroll or mortgage payments or rent payments, inventory, all of those different pieces. We also were the vortex of the essential versus non-essential conversation in Wisconsin. So many states, as we introduced Safer at Home or the shut-in orders, had to determine which businesses stayed open. And while we had an extensive description of that in our Safer at Home order, we still had gray areas for who was essential and who was not essential. And so my team fielded about 5,000 inquiries from businesses, and we're able to move those through. This was in a desperation moment to understand whether or not we could keep our businesses open, and super proud of how we were able to help businesses with that. We also launched what's called the Ethnic Minority Emergency Grant. So this was a $2.5 million program designed, again, for businesses that we were concerned were falling through the cracks of the federal support that was being issued. And so these were businesses that were 5 employees or less, so really micro businesses. And we worked with the chambers in Wisconsin that are particularly focused on communities of color and helped to get the word out for that. We had 1,000 grants that were just able to share with folks, and we've gotten overwhelming positive about how that really helped. We're just looking to provide support for the businesses, and what I've seen as far as economic development goes is this network of support is incredibly important, whether it's the chambers or the banks or folks like Julia that are helping those small businesses get the resources that they need. So those are really critical pieces. We haven't really been busy. We also were able to provide businesses with guidance when the Safer at Home order was overturned by the Wisconsin Supreme Court, we stepped in with guidances that would help businesses understand how to reopen. And it was really born out of conversations we had with the small businesses that were overwhelmed with this concept of, what do I do in this new world order? How do I meet my customers with what they need as far as safety, my employees with what they need as far as safety? And so we provided a set of guidelines that were driven from the industries that the businesses found themselves in, whether it was restaurants or hotels. We worked with those associations. We learned a lot from our businesses that have global enterprises. So we have businesses in Wisconsin that learned lessons in China, learned lessons in Italy and France, and we're able to bring those lessons to Wisconsin, and we share those with our businesses. So I feel like we've done a lot to provide guidance for our businesses. And the last thing that we did on the grant front is we provided and are continuing to provide a grant to our small businesses through CARES Act funding. So this is called the We're All In grant, and it is $75 million worth of CARES Act funding that we're distributing to Wisconsin businesses of 20 or less employees with $1 million or less in revenue. And it'll be 30,000 grants when all is said and done. We're in the midst of that. We've distributed about half of those funds now, and we've got about half to go. So at WEDC, we have turned everything on its head, and in the last 3 or 4 months, we have distributed over $80 million in grant funding to about 32,000 businesses. In a typical year at WEDC, we do about 350 grants. We did those 350 grants also, but we did, we added on a few thousand other grants. And so we're really happy to be able to serve the businesses of Wisconsin, and we continue to do that. Through all of this, one of our eyes has always been on the horizon and on what's happening with the Wisconsin economy. In mid-April, in legislation passed by the Wisconsin legislature and signed by the governor, the legislature asked for a report from WEDC about the impact of COVID-19 on our major industries and a plan for recovery. That report was due on June 30th. I'm proud to say we got it done, but nobody really, understood at the time. I think it was a great ask by the legislature, but I think everybody thought, mid-April, okay, by the end of June, we'll be well on our way towards recovery. And, although we were reopening and having all those conversations, we all know the reality that we're in right now, which is still trying to find that place of true recovery and moving past relief. So as we prepared the report, although the legislature asked us to focus on 7 industries, and I know them by heart, so I'm going to tell you, which is retail, tourism, services, manufacturing, construction, forest products, and agriculture. Those are the major industries that the legislature asked us to focus on. We also took a broad view of the Wisconsin economy. So when you think about economic development or you think about relief, you think, okay, there's one town that was hit by a tornado or a flood, and we need to go in there and put our economic development hat on and provide relief and recovery. Well, this has hit the whole state, the whole nation, the whole world. And so the impact of this is incredibly complicated. Everyone has been hit by it. And that's how we wanted to approach the report, to really indicate who all has been affected by this and how. So we took it from a perspective of small businesses, large businesses, industries, also communities, and really focusing on what we've learned in this situation, which is although we had a strong economy headed into COVID, at the state level we had about 3.2% unemployment and we had a strong GDP. We had weaknesses in our economy, and the COVID stress really demonstrated those, whether it's childcare or healthcare, these things that we realize now, you have to have a really functioning, vibrant childcare system in order to have a functioning, vibrant economy. And so we took those lessons and incorporated them into our report. But of course, if we're talking to the legislature, they also want recommendations and what we think about. So we identified 3 priorities in our report for recovery. We tried to make these broad, but not so broad to be vague. And the 3 priorities are: 1, get people back to work. So in this economic downturn we are seeing something different than what we see in a normal economic downturn. And this is me talking to economists and just plagiarizing and repeating what they said to me. But essentially, in a normal kind of recession downturn, you see that mid-level skill worker lose their job, whether it's a factory worker or manufacturing. Someone who is on the floor and working day to day, and the cutbacks in the economy demonstrate through layoffs and things like that. Well, in this instance, what we're seeing is wholesale service industry businesses close, whether it's a restaurant, a hotel. And so those are lower skilled jobs and lower wage jobs. And so those are also in many instances going away. When you have a restaurant that, although it opens, it's coming back at 25 or 50% capacity, it's going to come back with much less workers. So instead of having 2 hostesses on at night or 4 busboys, you're going to have 1 and 2. And so those other jobs have just gone away. And so critically important is that we think about those workers and how to get those workers back to work. And so our focus in that priority is thinking about how do we get the skills training to those workers, how do we step in and lift them up, so not only are they getting back to work, but maybe they're getting back to work in a more family sustaining wage, and they're really able to move forward and recover from this along with everyone else. The second priority is fixing broadband. So in Wisconsin, we continue to struggle with pockets and regions that don't have broadband, and these are both urban issues and rural issues. It is something that we can overcome if we can prioritize it rather than trying to do everything. Let's just fix broadband and get a win. And so we recommend working on that. The Public Service Commission in Wisconsin has laid out a strategy for getting it done. We need some information gathering to have it happen, and of course some resources, but it's not insurmountable. As we say in the report, it's not a moonshot. So let's just fix broadband in Wisconsin, because we've seen how critically important it is for our education and for our online working. It's just got to happen now. And every minute that goes by is a minute that we're losing in that fight. And the last piece is support innovation. And since I've come into economic development, I see the critical role that entrepreneurship and innovation has in creating jobs and solving problems. And again, the research shows that in a moment like this, in a crisis like this, people tend to contract from taking risk. I'm going to keep my job rather than starting my own business. I'm going to, this is steady as she goes, not going to take a lot of risk, not going to take something to market. I don't have my crazy invention that I'm going to try to market to Julia or Kelly. And so what we want to do as a state is we want to really support a culture of innovation and this idea that, hey, we need to move forward. We need to support those startup businesses. And we need to think about, all these businesses in Wisconsin that have pivoted in the last few months, and all the citizens of Wisconsin who've learned to work online or learned to manufacture PPE or pivoted from brewing beer to making hand sanitizer. Like, the innovation that's happened in the last 4 or 5 months is incredible. And we have to harness that energy and help us propel that to the future. So those are the priorities that we identified. I'm happy with anyone in Wisconsin. For anybody who's not in Wisconsin, I'm not going to fight with you about them. But if in Wisconsin, I'm happy to have vibrant discussions about, are those the right priorities? I'm not married to any of them. I just think it's really important in a time of limited resources that we think about, how do we prioritize our work going forward? Let's find those places that we agree and move forward together on them. The last piece of the report that I'm really focused on is the fact that in Wisconsin, we are losing the racial economic disparity fight. In Wisconsin, as many of our Midwest states are, we are ranked very, very low as far as that goes, and we have to focus on it. The things that we've been doing in the past are not going to change because we haven't been able to change it so far. So we need to learn, we need to listen, and we need to make change and have a bias towards action to fix the problems that we've created, to discern what obstacles we've put in place, and take those obstacles down and to open up economic development to all communities. It's really important that we focus on communities of color and give them the chance to participate in economic well-being and make sure that they're getting that. And so that's a real focus now of WEDC. It's a focus of mine. It's a focus of the governor. So I'm excited that we're going to be able to make change. It is so complicated and so hard, but the time is now more than any. So that's the overarching priority is to keep that focused, but we'll get some quick wins as we recover and we will start to move towards that. So that is all that has been happening at WEDC. I'm sure I left out a few things, but it's been quite a ride, and we're glad to be part of the economic development ecosystem in Wisconsin and in our surrounding states. And so that is my summary. I'm happy to have questions after Julia gives her presentation. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And I do want to remind the audience that the report that the Secretary is referencing is the Wisconsin Tomorrow, an Economy for All, and a link was provided to the report in the emails inviting you to register for today's webinar. So it is a really thoughtful, well-organized report that gave me personally a lot of great insights. So it's an important document, and I really encourage everybody watching today to download it and take some time to read it. Collectively, if we work on those priorities, we're all going to benefit. So turning to Julia, Julia, maybe you can start, because we do have audience members from the 3 states and actually a lot of times from Michigan and other places around the country. But for those folks that are not familiar with the Greater Milwaukee Committee, can you share a little bit about the organization and the work that you do?
Sure. And let me also just say too, I just want to thank Secretary Hughes. We worked with her quite a bit and her staff as we were going through all the transitions with COVID, and really appreciated her responsiveness and openness and willing to look at the issues. And certainly, I think the issues you've outlined are ones that actually been some longer term issues for Wisconsin, but are really brought out now that the tide has gone out due to COVID. So thank you. Sure, can we put the slides up and maybe I can walk through some of this?
Sure, this I've already allowed for share screen. So do you have those?
I didn't know you want me to share it. Okay, hang on one second. There we go.
I also have them if you need to.
No, I've got it. Hang on.
Great.
All right. Get back here. I will share the screen. Hang on. Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you. So this is a little overview on the GMC. Basically, we are a private sector civic organization. We're not a chamber. And our focus has actually been on civic projects over the years in Milwaukee's area. We've got a number of CEOs. We're CEO leadership group, particularly in the areas of business, higher education, foundations, labor, and nonprofit communities. Many years ago, we were well known for the large brick and mortar projects that make up a lot of the cultural assets, but now we look much more at significant social issues that are holding back Milwaukee, including the areas of innovation and talent, economic prosperity, and the vibrancy of place. So I wanted to share this map with you, which may be a little hard to see, but I wanted to share it because I think it tells a history of 2 Milwaukees. If you look in this map, it's a composite of a racial dot map that Google has that's based on census tract numbers, as well as a map that ran about 10 years ago, actually, in the journal Sentinel, in a series that John Schmidt did called Hit by the Global Train. And in this map, if you look at it, you could see white populations defined by blue dots, African American by green dots, Asian by red dots, and Latino or Hispanic is by orange dots. You can also see these large white areas here that my cursor is going over. These are the railroad lines. So this is the North Line, this is the Beer Line Trail, these are the railroad yards. And then also through it, there's a river as well as I-43, an expressway that goes through. Basically what this map talks about is that in the 1970s, there were 90,000 jobs that existed around these rail lines. And these dots all represent companies where there were significant manufacturing that went on. So a lot of people came up into the area of Milwaukee that immigrants have always settled in over the years for a number of reasons, but primarily because of those transportation areas that were there. Because that was, you could live close to work, you could walk to work, and it was good housing stock and it was widely available. One other reason is because Milwaukee, like many other places, also had a number of deed restrictions that limited really where people could live based on their ethnic background and their racial background. So this is how Milwaukee has developed its patterns of segregation over the years, is people really were stuck in place when the jobs left. And this is recent, the most recent census tract data. So as you can see, we've remained defined by these man-made and natural boundaries. So I want to talk a little bit about Milwaukee's approach on this. So about 6 years ago, we began a very intentional response to racial and economic inequities in the two Milwaukees. So one of the things we did was launch Scale Up, and it was launched with significant help from WEDC, because more than 90% of the state's businesses are considered small. And those businesses employ almost half of Wisconsin employees. Firms with less than 100 employees comprise the largest share of small business employment. And in the disinvested neighborhoods in Milwaukee, many of the small businesses are not owned by local residents or employ local residents. So the generational wealth from neighborhood-owned businesses, that's a cornerstone that changes a disinvested neighborhood to a prosperous neighborhood, is missing. So we started Scale Up. It's not a startup program. It's a growth program that's agnostic to sector, but it really is focused on Black and brown business owners, and it represented a significant opportunity to expand the small business sector in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin. So 9.4% of Wisconsin businesses are minority owned. This percentage is much lower than the minority population, which comprises almost 18% of the state. Additionally, though, a typical minority-owned business lags behind the typical white-owned business in every single key metric, including sales from average of 230,000 compared to 1.5 million, and employees, 20 employees compared to 9 employees for African-American compared to white-owned businesses. So Scale Up's programming and content is customized into 2 programs that are based on revenue and demographics. Businesses with annual revenue from 1 million to 15 million participate in the Scale Up Growth Accelerator. As you can see, 30% of the businesses in that area are owned by people of color. We were very interested in how we grew that number into the Growth Accelerator. So we began Spark, and Spark is really focused in the commercial corridors that saw a significant decline over the years from the 70s to now in the disinvested communities. Spark is 1 million and under, and we have 67% of the businesses owned by people of color. Rising Tide is actually a program that focuses entirely on African-American businesses that have the opportunity for significant growth, and that operates as a cohort within the Growth Accelerator. So Scale Up Milwaukee's gotten a very good track record of spurring the catalytic growth for these businesses. It serves with its companies, we've had 151 companies that have gone through Scale Up for a combined 37% projected revenue growth in 2020. These companies also account for almost 1,300 cumulative new jobs that have been created in Milwaukee. Our overall goal is to actually generate over $1 billion in cumulative new revenue growth through scale-up companies in 10 years. To date, we've generated close to $400 million in cumulative revenue growth in the prior 5 years. We know that COVID's going to will drive that number down. And the pandemic has certainly disproportionately impacted communities of color. The Black and brown businesses have been impacted disproportionately hard. The 5 hardest hit sectors in the economy are leisure and hospitality, retail trade, transportation, utilities, and construction. These 5 sectors represent nearly 40% of the revenue for Black-owned businesses compared to 25% for all firms. And as Secretary Hughes mentioned, broadband, the digital divide is also significantly impacting these businesses, both internally with technical expertise to expand their markets virtually and to reach current customers and to even apply for available resources. Elmer Moore, who actually runs our program, was telling me the story yesterday about a consultant who was going around to small-owned businesses individually with a laptop because so many of them only had a phone to access for the PPP grants or for the We're All In grants to help them be able to manage that. Also, Wi-Fi is often not available in the neighborhoods where these customers live. And so looking at the expansion of Wi-Fi and the digital divide is going to be an important part of our next work with Scale Up. And go down here. You have to get this to advance. Hang on here.
Yep, it's now to Milwaukee United.
Yeah, oh, okay, good, thank you. So Milwaukee United was a program that we started around 5 years ago. It's a collaborative program. It's focused on the neighborhoods around the downtown that have been disinvested for many years. It's involving the City of Milwaukee, the Urban League, LISC, the GMC, and the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And so over the past few years, our focus has really been, again, on some of the issues that we've seen arise from this mass segregation. Last year in November, we were approached on the anti-displacement fund by residences in the areas right near the downtown. Many of them saw 25 to 30% increases in their property values, which you would think would be a great thing, except when you're on a limited income and all of a sudden your taxes are going up that much, you wind up being forced to move. And being forced to move at the same time that you're probably finally gaining the type of residual value in your home that you might have lived in 30 or 40 years. So this is one of 2 anti-displacement funds that exist in the country. It was privately funded with $400,000 that was raised at the end of the year and impacted 88 households who had the abnormal increase in their property taxes paid for out of this fund and will continue to as long as they're in the program. Brew City Match actually started about 3 years ago, and it's really based on a program out of Detroit called Motor City Match. It's a very collaborative program. It runs through LISC under the Milwaukee United umbrella. Initially, it launched 59 businesses and leveraged over $4 million in private capital and $1 million in public capital into those commercial corridors that were so devastated when the jobs left. And it connected small businesses to over 70,000 square feet. Our goal on this is to eventually revitalize over 1 million square feet of vacant commercial corridor in these neighborhoods. On July 7th, despite the pandemic, 38 more winners were selected, and the winners include 30 business owners and 8 commercial property owners. 97% of the business owners are entrepreneurs of color, 77% are women-owned businesses. And a number of the Brew City Match businesses are now participating in Spark, and that number will grow as the businesses become more established. And this is heavily supported by Greater Milwaukee Foundation, as well as JP Morgan Chase. So now I'm going to try to advance this again. Good. Okay, and the comments. So one of the big issues that we've also seen come out of the disinvestment in these neighborhoods is the ability to retain young people of color in our community. So many young people leave Milwaukee because they don't see an opportunity for themselves or a way to make a mark. And they're really the lifeblood of our neighborhoods. So the Commons is a program that runs as a cohort program. It's now virtual. And in the past, it's ran with over 35% students of color. The students are linked to both corporations, entrepreneurship opportunities, and social ventures. The collab component of it is using that model, but it was working with 3 different neighborhood bids and the young people in those bids to come up with solutions for their neighborhood and to help really help grow those neighborhoods back. This summer, we launched a virtual internship program. We had over 750 applications for it. We were able to fund 120 virtual interns. 50% are students of color, 50% women. We were also able to provide stipends of $1,500 for these students who, most of whom lost their internship, lost their jobs, would have had no funding for return to higher education except for this program. So these are some of the areas that we've really focused on to look at how do we start to turn that map around in Milwaukee and bring investment back to the disinvested communities that we serve.
Well, that is, you know, it's so refreshing to see the work that was started, you know, 5 years ago plus, so that this, you know, the foundation was set. One question for people that are watching again from all over the country: Chicago has been on the national news because of the social unrest, you know, happening on the streets. What are you seeing on the ground in Milwaukee?
Okay. Well, I would say there's certainly plenty of social unrest. Certainly the protests are still ongoing. I think we're day 46 or 47. They've been, I would say, very significantly peaceful protests for the most part. We did have certainly some small businesses that were impacted, particularly by damage from some of the car caravans and some broken windows. But I would say more importantly, Milwaukee is starting to understand the issues of these generations of disinvestment and racial inequality. Our organization has started meeting virtually every 2 weeks, and the last 3 to 4 meetings have all focused on racial equity and what is our responsibility as an organization. What do we need to do in Milwaukee to start to change these dynamics? And it's been a very introspective time, but also time for action.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, we have audience questions already coming in, so let me read the first one, and this is to Secretary Hughes. What new strategies have you developed or are you developing for collaboration with other Wisconsin state agencies on economic development projects and processes?
So I appreciate that question. We've had at the Wisconsin administration level cabinet meetings throughout the pandemic. We started almost right away back in March, having meetings every night, and we've now, I think, like a lot of folks who had, you know, emergency meetings every day, we've minimized those now to twice a week. But it gave the opportunity for all of us to really dive in and understand what each other is working on when it comes to responding to the crisis. And by doing that, we've really been able to connect the dots, which is something that our governor is really passionate about, connecting the dots between the agencies. And so we've worked with a number of the different agencies to develop a campaign about wearing masks, a social campaign that is supportive of making sure you're doing the right things, you know, wearing masks and social distancing, but also supporting our local businesses. And the other agencies are helping us push that out. So, you know, that's one example. As we look at the report and what we developed, you know, two of those, the getting folks back to work and the broadband, are really not in WEDC's bailiwick, right? That's the Department of Workforce Development, typically in Wisconsin, and the broadband lays at the feet of the Public Service Commission. But it's our goal to help support that, because we've seen how that becomes critical for economic development. Childcare and healthcare were key in our report. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, the need to have a good childcare system and a good healthcare system are critical for the economy. And then the last piece is, we don't typically play in tourism or agriculture. And so we worked very closely with the Departments of Agriculture and the Department of Tourism in developing the understanding of the impact that COVID has had on those reports. So I think we're really working well to develop interconnections between our agencies and understanding how we work together. When I came on as a cabinet member, I came on a little later than everyone else. And I remember my first cabinet meeting, everybody was talking about economic development and their role in economic development. I was like, hey, wait a second, I'm the one who's got it in the title. But they all, you know, everybody thinks of their work, rightly so, as economic development. And so really thinking about how do we work together and keep communications going. And so we've got efforts underway to make sure we're creating those connections and finding those opportunities to leverage what other agencies are doing.
Perfect. Thank you. So again, a reminder to the audience, please use the question and answer, the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen if there's something that you would like to know from our speakers today. And Julia, since you spent a lot of your presentation talking about racial inequity, let me ask this question from the audience. Regarding the racial economic disparity, what are the most important things that businesses or individuals can do now to help close this gap?
There's actually quite a few things that can be done. So thank you for the question. I think some of it is to look who you hire and look who you spend money in terms of your own supplier diversity, to form the relationships with small businesses of color can make a big difference in those areas. I think the other thing is to really look at where some of the needs are. There are ways that individuals and businesses can spur activity to help resolve some of these issues. We have a business leader in Milwaukee, Tina Chang, who worked with the public schools to raise $1 million to help provide Wi-Fi hotspots throughout the city for the public school kids that are going to be returning to school this fall. There's still going to be a portion online. A good part of the week will be online, but part will be in the classroom. And the access to Wi-Fi in the neighborhoods is very limited. So the ability for students to be able to access it, MPS was able to provide Chromebooks to the students, but Chromebooks only work with Wi-Fi. So I think that there are things that individuals can step up to do, whether it's sponsoring a hotspot for a period of time, whether it's hiring on young people, especially from the neighborhood. We have a whole young generation right now that is feeling pretty at sea and hopeless because there's no internships and there's no jobs.
Mm-hmm. Julia, there's another question for you. Have you looked at synergies with the Commons and the WHEDA Development Training Program? This particular viewer is a big fan of both.
I'm not sure what the WHEDA Development Training Program is. You know, I do know Joaquin Alturo pretty well, so I'm sure we'll find out and see where we can find what synergies are there. The Commons has partnered with a number of different entities and agencies. It's a very collaborative program to try to reach different audiences.
Great, thank you. Secretary Hughes, I know you'd mentioned several key economic driver sectors. And I know in agriculture, for example, even pre-COVID, there was a lot of concern with disruption in agriculture and a lot of the dairy farms that are in Wisconsin. Can you maybe help us understand what was happening and how COVID has impacted the kind of acceleration of problems in that sector?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I took this role, we mentioned Organic Valley earlier, was having worked for farmers for 16 years. And it was really critical to me to continue to think about how do we help farmers stay on their farms and pass the farms on to the next generation as they want to. And the farmers that I worked for Organic Valley were passionate about at least providing the opportunity to the next generation of participating in the farm and wanting to be a part of that. And what we were really seeing and what I saw as I went around Wisconsin is a consolidation. So as we see efficiencies needed and more competition, we see consolidation, and that's happening both on the farm side of things, it's happening on the manufacturing side of things, and in fact we're seeing it now with COVID on the retail side of things, where we had lots of little retailers. Now we're seeing customers go to, the big retailers, and we have to be thinking about how do we, if we want to intentionally stop that trend. When COVID hit, agriculture was really upended in a number of ways, mostly through supply chain. So on the dairy side of things, you saw where you had, I'll make up the numbers, 50% of dairy sales going to food service and 50% going to home use. All of a sudden, all that food service got changed to home use. And that's different packaging, it's different processing. And so the industry took some time and took some hits in regrouping there. But, as we have seen this kind of smooth out, we've also seen a recognition by many grocery stores and other outlets that it's important to have local sources of food, and the small, diverse sources mitigate risk. And so you can continue to make sure you have a supply for your customers if you have a diverse supply of incoming products. And so I think what COVID has done for agriculture is identify that diversity and flexibility are really critically important. And so hopefully, as we learn those lessons, we'll carry that forward. And we'll remember that having everything coming from one source or one processing plant is not going to be ultimately how we can be sure to have resiliency in the system. And so, we saw some lack of flexibility. We saw some lack of ability to pivot, and hopefully we'll carry it forward that we need to keep those things in place. And that helps with diversity. It helps with the small farmers. It helps with the large farmers. It gives room for everybody if we don't just focus in one direction.
And since you work in the state's capital, maybe you can help us all understand from the state perspective, are the number of COVID cases going up? I know recently the mayor of Chicago has put Wisconsin on the quarantine list with, I think, a total of 22 other states. So maybe you can speak a little bit to what's happening in the state.
Yeah, I think we did incredibly well in flattening the curve. The Safer at Home order was part of it, but also just, a collective decision to take care of each other and to kind of stand down, and in Wisconsin, we did that really well. The businesses bore the brunt of it. The communities of color bore the brunt of it, but we were able to flatten the curve. And with the overturning of the Safer at Home order, we were a little bit, the governor described it as the Wild West. And folks, we still really maintained ourselves and did okay there for a month or so, but we started to relax, we started to let our guard down, and indeed, we're seeing the consequences of that in many areas outside of the state, where during the height of everything happening in April, Madison and Milwaukee were really kind of the focal points, and there was a lot of conversation of, there's no COVID in rural areas, we should be able to reopen them. Well, now we're seeing, La Crosse or Sheboygan, other parts of the state really be impacted by increased COVID cases. So, unfortunately, we are in a time right now where we're seeing increased cases in Wisconsin. It's why we just need to realize that the way to get through this is to put on your mask and to do the social distancing. Really, honestly, the guiding light right now is that we should be staying at home unless we necessarily need to go out. And by taking these steps now, we will speed up our recovery. It seems counterintuitive, but we've got to settle back in and stop the spread of the virus in order to be able to move forward.
I have to say, in the report of the Wisconsin Tomorrow and Economy for All, I believe that you kind of point out that if you live in La Crosse and you leave your home, you are, almost assured of coming into contact with the virus. I mean, that was, to me, it really took me back in terms of such a stark warning. And I hope that the residents, are paying attention to this, so that, that people can stay healthy and strong, and we can get back to containment.
When we were writing the report, our real focus was on recovery. How do we move forward? What are our priorities we want to put forward? And literally, in the days before we published the report, I looked at the team and I was like, you guys, the most important thing we got to do is shut down this virus. Like, before we can have any of this conversation, we have got to shut it down. And that's why you see it highlighted there. And we keep talking about it.
Great. And my next question may, and I completely understand if you don't have these statistics, but just on the off chance, I recently read an article that talked about Yelp and the restaurants that are reviewed on Yelp, that they anticipate that approximately 41% of the restaurants will never reopen. So my question is, Julia, do you have a handle in Milwaukee? And Secretary Hughes, do you have a handle statewide in terms of the number of businesses that are permanently closed?
Well, I think a lot of places have not have closed temporarily. They've not declared themselves permanently closed. Occasionally, you see one saying that they are going to permanently close. The uncertainty right now of how long the pandemic will last and the economics of it are going to be difficult. Restaurants operate on such a thin margin anyway. It's hospitality, it's service that is really being incredibly impacted, retail as well currently. So I have not seen numbers on how many consider themselves permanently closed. I don't know, Secretary Hughes, if you have.
It's a really hard thing to track because it's almost, and it's been really frustrating for me, it's almost like they just disappeared into the ether, some of these businesses, and really being able to understand how they've left, especially when something happens this quickly and you can't just rely on year over year data or, the typical kind of data. What we've been trying to track, I appreciate Yelp. So the Yelp, I do know that article. I read a little bit about that. They're doing their data gathering based on people making social media announcements that they're closing. And they've seen, I think, nationwide about 60,000 of those closings. And then Harvard is also tracking and had seen some more. I'm trying to find the data source that would help us understand that. One of the things that we're looking at is tracking credit card usage and whether or not a company that was previously, taking credit card transactions has disappeared. And we're seeing about an 8 or 9% hit as far as a company that was taking a credit card transaction back in January is no longer. So it's trying to track something that's gone away isn't necessarily that easy. But I will say, just because I want to keep saying it, those businesses that are still hanging on, that Julia mentioned, that hopefully are going to reopen their doors, are not going to be able to reopen their doors unless we shut down this virus. And so it's incumbent, and we owe it to the small businesses to recognize they've put their heart and soul and often their savings into creating a business, and we owe it to them to help them be able to reopen their doors and keep them open.
We recently had the president of Broadway in Chicago as one of our webinar guests, and he talked about the importance of the contact tracing and how, particularly with theaters and the arts, for people to be able to be comfortable to going back to a show, that they also need to know that if they were exposed, that they're able to get that information in short order. What is Wisconsin doing in terms of contact tracing?
Well, we have really amped up our contact tracing. That was one of the key pieces. So, as you put in place a response to a pandemic, the first thing that you need to do is testing. You need to have isolation facilities, and then you need to be able to do contact tracing. So we hired about 1,000 contact tracers all around the state, and we have been working with them and using them. The challenge is that once you have exposure in a bar or exposure, on a beach, you don't have the ability to contact trace. So, Broadway and Chicago is able to probably collect people's information as they come in with a ticket. They've got a cell phone, you've got a way to reach back out to them. But if you've got 100 people in a bar, you have no idea who they are. And so contact tracing becomes a real challenge with this experience of bars being open and kids going to bars, and then they go to 10 other bars, and so we continue to really do contact tracing, but it is a challenge when you have community spread the way we do.
Thank you. Right. Julia, in terms of kind of being again on the ground in Milwaukee, what are you seeing and hearing in terms of businesses opening and or allowing their employees to continue to work at home?
Most of the corporations are encouraging their employees to continue to work from home. I think the announcement was just out that Northwestern Mutual is now looking at least continuing to work from home until beginning of 2021. So I think if there's the ability to work from home, most, I think many of the companies have been very surprised at how well it's done to actually transition to work from home. I think that where you run into issues are really more essential services and the hospitality service areas where you really have to have people on the ground. I did just get a note from one of my staff that evidently none of the scale-up restaurants have closed permanently. Everybody's doing curbside. And I think a lot of employers are trying to figure things out, whether it's this transition to PPE or whatever types of things they're trying to do on the manufacturing thing, or restaurants to keep the carryout going, to at least keep key employees employed. Daycares are starting to reopen, but sometimes as soon as they reopen, they wind up closing again because of exposure to a positive COVID case. So it is difficult right now, I think, for businesses to reopen to any type of a degree, let's put it that way.
Sure. And Secretary Hughes, I really appreciate that supporting innovation is one of the key priorities of the report and of WEDC. And we've long heard about disruption and the fact that we're kind of living in this age of disruption, and COVID has really accelerated so much of that. So getting back to the innovation ecosystem, how do you address the mentality of the person who has a job and is now afraid to start being an entrepreneur or get some new invention into the marketplace? How do you address the mentality?
Well, when you have that kind of mentality, if you don't see any support system, you're going to stay in that place where you're at. And I think having a support system that demonstrates, hey, we've got your back, we want you to take these chances. If we're those of us with bully pulpits are saying, hey, go out and take that chance, we're going to support you, whether it's through an accelerator and teach you how to do a business plan, or whether it's through some grant monies, but it's also talking about it, and it's celebrating those risk takers and giving them the feeling that, oh, I'm helping. If there's anything folks want to do in this moment, it is help. And so helping to create jobs, helping to find solutions. Often when you are an entrepreneur, you get your idea because you think you're going to help solve something. And in Wisconsin, we have an incredible ecosystem of biotech and other technology. We have startups that help with manufacturing challenges. So it's solving problems, and so encouraging somebody to come forward with their problem solving ideas and to know they're supported. As we've done the grant programs for our small businesses, and I mentioned this before, often what we hear so much is, I'm just so glad that there's somebody who can help me. Mm-hmm. And to know that you've got somebody who's ready to help, and that's what I'm learning to love about the economic development world, is it's all about supporting our businesses and about helping folks move forward. And so just knowing that somebody's got your back is incredibly important to help shift that mentality.
Mm-hmm. And, I'd like to share with you, of course, is, the leader of the Alliance for Regional Development. And I understand that traditional economic development is really about business, location and recruitment, but there's so much more to economic development. And, as we are in such, perilous times, unprecedented issues, it really does provide an opportunity for us to explore how we can better work together across state lines and help with the supply chain disruptions, or just with connecting the dots between businesses across the state lines. I know when the OECD report was published in 2012, and I suspect that it's still true, again, although everything is kind of up in the air, but our regional economy is the third largest contributor to the national GDP. And yet, even at the strong times of growth, we are not growing at the average of the national GDP. So this was pre-COVID. So it's almost like, as bad as all of this is, it almost kind of wipes the slate clean with an ability to really start over and to put some new processes and programs in place that can address some of the disparities and some of the lags that we've been experiencing literally for decades. Any thoughts on regional collaboration?
I think the digital divide may be a good place to start, quite frankly. Broadband doesn't have to be limited by state boundaries. And I think that these technology lifelines are going to be really critical to who moves ahead, whether it's in education or entrepreneurship or regular economic development work. If you don't have the access to broadband and Wi-Fi today, you're sunk. You're just really sunk.
And quite honestly, that is an issue across the entire mega region. I've heard that in the Chicagoland area as well as Northwest Indiana. Well, it's hard to believe, but we've actually exceeded our hour. So let me just ask Secretary Hughes, any closing remarks?
Oh, well, if I can, I just want to say, on the question of regional economic development, in my previous life, which wasn't that long ago, we never thought about state lines. Mm-hmm. And you think about what's the best way to do business, and I think approaching economic development from that perspective and thinking about what are our strengths in the Midwest region and how can we develop those strengths and be working together is critically important. It's only since being in state government that I think about the state line, and it still doesn't really stick with me. So I just appreciate the chance. Yeah, I won't let it. I appreciate the chance to share with folks what we're working on. I think, Kelly, what you were just saying, our role as economic developers is to develop the economy. And, we have a set of tools, but there's absolutely no reason that we don't need to develop new tools. And we should focus on where we're trying to go rather than what are the tools to get us there, and really envision that together. And I think once we do that, and we can find the way to get there with whatever tools we have, or if we need to build new tools. But I think we have to put our sights on the horizon and think about where do we want to go.
Thank you, Secretary. It's music to my ears. Julia, any closing words?
Well, I would just say that I think we're a very resilient region in many ways, and that the focus on innovation is going to be critical. There will be great things that will come out of the pain of this pandemic, and they will be related to innovation and new ways of doing things. And I think we have to really stay focused on finding those avenues of innovation and what can accelerate it.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Secretary Hughes. And thank you, audience, for tuning in today. I know people can feel zoomed out many afternoons, and I really appreciate you taking the time to participate in our conversation, ask questions. I want you to know that our next webinar is going to be Thursday at 1 o'clock. So notice the time change. It'll be 1 o'clock Central Time, and we're going to have Illinois' Deputy Governor for Education. So if you have school-age children, whether it's grammar school or high school or even college, you'll want to make sure to tune into that conversation. I also want you to be aware that the Alliance is starting a new service where if you sign up, you will receive kind of the top news stories from the leading publications within the mega region. So Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, but specifically Milwaukee, Chicago, Northwest Indiana. So please be sure to subscribe to that news service. And last but not least, we will be hosting our 7th summit with the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. That will be the week of November 16th. You may recall that you should have received a save the date for Monday, November 16th, but the bank will not be having any in-person conferences. So we're going to have 2 hours of programming each morning the week of November 16th. So mark your calendar for that, and don't be surprised if you don't see these two ladies participating. I know I'm going to do my best to rail them into participating in November. So with that, I think it's been a great conversation. I'm so grateful for your time, and I wish everyone to stay well, stay strong, and I look forward to seeing you again on Thursday. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
Thank you. Bye, Missy.
Bye-bye.